Hello and welcome to Currency Live. My name is Tyler Sherwin and I'm Vice President of Sales here at BVNK. And I'm extremely excited about today's conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. 12 months ago, the idea of a $12 billion a month corporate payments company using stablecoin rails might have seemed far-fetched. But today, that idea is becoming a reality. My guest today is proof of this. His name is Sam Marsh, and he'll be joining us to talk about how this gigantic payments company is starting to support additional payment rails on the blockchain. If you don't know Corpay, they're a corporate payments giant that serves more than 800,000 clients worldwide. They process over 400 billion in payments volume annually across over 145 currencies. Now, last week, they just announced two extremely exciting partnerships. JP Morgan's private blockchain is being added to their platform and BVNK's stablecoin platform. So today we're going to dig into what these partnerships enable, the use cases behind them, and how Corpay plans on rolling this out to their clients. I've actually been lucky enough to lead this partnership from the BVNK side for over 12 months now, and watching the development of Corpay's stablecoin strategy during this time has been extremely rewarding. Now, a little bit about Sam. He is the Chief Commercial Officer for Corpay Cross-Border, and he brings over 15 years of experience in fintech. Most recently, he co-founded the private markets division at Alpha Group International, helping transform it from a specialist FX provider into a leading multi-product banking alternative, supporting more than 2,000 investment managers globally. Now, following Alpha Group's $2.4 billion acquisition by Corpay just last year in 2025, he's now become the Chief Commercial Officer for the Cross-Border Division. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Hi, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. We've done a couple of these now. This is our second interview together, and I'm really excited to dive into what Corpay is thinking in terms of stablecoins. So are you okay if we start with a quick warm-up round? We'll do some just quick fire questions, simple answers, yes or no, or short phrases, and then we'll dive into the meat of the topic. Does that work for you?
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll start with this. What's the biggest blocker to stablecoin adoption today?
I would say probably broad awareness and traditional infrastructures that support businesses.
Okay, now here's another one. Corpay is now offering both stablecoins and private blockchains. Are these solving the same problem differently or different problems?
Different problems. So private blockchain, very much behind the scenes, working at expanding our treasury capabilities that is benefiting customers kind of without them necessarily need to opt in. And then the second part, the public blockchain, is something that we can then directly facilitate that the customer is owning, storing, and then transferring themselves. So slightly different use cases.
Okay, I can't wait to unpack that. Another question. Do CFOs even care what rails they use for the payments they need?
No, I think largely not. No, I think it's a afterthought. It's a byproduct. Certain circumstances, yeah, for sure. But I think most of the time it's just about, has it got there? Not necessarily understanding which rail it's gone through.
Now, how long do you think until stablecoins feel normal for enterprises?
That is probably the multi-billion dollar question. I still think it has some time, if I'm honest. I think it's not a 12-month process. I think it has some progression and some development and education, really, and for that to become more of a norm.
I think you're right. Now, here's one word. What does adding blockchain rails to Corpay's platform unlock?
Opportunities.
Cool. So let's dive into what those opportunities are. It's pretty impossible to answer all those questions in just one or two words, right? There's so much going on here, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of moving parts, but let's make it easy for our audience. You've spent over a decade using technology to solve problems for your clients in the variety of businesses you've been in. I'm curious, can you tell us what drew you to this space and what problems are you solving today for businesses at Corpay?
Yeah, no, it's fair. So I think, so where I'd start back from is obviously my prior experience, and obviously where I've spent the last, sort of 13 years of my career within kind of the financial services world, is focusing on that private market segment. I think the thing that really attracted to me that is that it was a So it was kind of an underserved market. So if you look back to 2013, it was still kind of a bit of an outsider to the broad kind of financial sector. It was something that didn't naturally fit within the structures of the banks. We identified a number of like key areas where actually it was consistently falling short, and it was almost like a really unhappy couple. Like the investment managers needed to work with the banks for a number of different facets, but the banks couldn't quite make it work in a scalable way. So I think that's where it was really interesting for us. We kind of came in, found key ways in which the clients were struggling, and then built products around those problems to enable us to scale. And I think it's very much the same challenge and same opportunity in lots of different market segments. What you're looking for is to find gaps in the market that aren't well served and build your kind of products and build your products around that customer segment and the real problems that they're facing.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you've noticed a consistent pattern, let's say, in the different products that you've brought to market that were successful. Was there some commonalities throughout those different products?
Yeah, and I think I would also adjust that to say where I've also seen products that we thought would make a lot of sense that then didn't resonate. And I think the difference was really where we were actually solving a client problem. I think when you're trying to create, if you're trying to create the outcome or you're trying to create the scenario through the technology, I think that's where it doesn't necessarily land. And I think that's where you see a lot of challenges. If you're very customer centric in your innovation, they almost bring the ideas to you. It's almost your job to just work out how to solve it. You're almost solving problems rather than just blank canvas innovation. I think that's where products work well and really move and resonate and progress up through that kind of innovation adoption cycle. I think it's also a little bit of the challenge where you see with stablecoins in that regard, because for some it solves a problem, for others it would create a problem by solving a problem that isn't necessarily there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you never want to be a solution in search of a problem. And I love that approach. It kind of speaks to the way Corpay has been thinking about this. Obviously, you had a conversation internally at Corpay a while ago to say, you know what, we need to start thinking about this. Could you walk our audience through the thinking that Corpay went through? How did it come about to where you are here today, announcing this partnership with BVNK?
Yeah. I think it's right things. If you look at what Corpay is, and in its name, corporate payments is really in its blood. The business is the company is all around making corporate payments, and reality is across the three kind of traditional rails, we are a very dominant part of that market. I think as we want to become that leading company, you have to pay attention as the innovation picks up, and I think as adoption has increased, and I think you saw that, and I mentioned it earlier on this week when you and I were discussing on the FinTech TV Live appearance. If you read that McKinsey report, which I think is quite interesting because it really revealed the reality of the breakdown of where the kind of the stablecoin market is today, it kind of stripped away the hype and really presented the facts in terms of where is the flow, what is the use cases across it. And I think whilst you look at the corporate payments flow, I think it was up to, I can't remember the exact figure, but it was about just under $400 billion in terms of what would be classified as B2B cross-border payments. And that's a small proportion of the overall B2B market, but it was enormous growth from the year prior. So I think as a business, we're very closely watching that the adoption is increasing. I don't think you could call it a mainstream component, and we're also not advocates saying, right, we're now going to be seeing an enormous number of our customers migrate to a public blockchain capability and stablecoins. But it's definitely something that we feel we can't ignore, and we want to lean into it as a business to help kind of drive that increasing adoption. On the flip side, and I kind of try and make sure we have some distinction between the two products. In the private blockchain, I think it's really quite straightforward. As kind of JP Morgan, Citibank, and others are building out their own, as you say, private blockchains, they're making it accessible through our normal course of business. We're not having to do anything enormous to change that to get the access. So I think in general, what we've realized is, one, we can now utilize blockchain as a business for our treasury capabilities, that our customers then benefit from that 24/7 settlement, which is obviously hugely advantageous, that always on network that we're aiming to achieve. That gives us an insight into what we are, well, not into the future, because I suppose it's here in the present, but it tells you what if the progression of stablecoins increases and we can get it into the hands of people in their day-to-day lives or their day-to-day business lives, then the benefits will be felt quickly and therefore will speed up adoption. So I think for us, it was around those two movements. I think you are obviously seeing through the changing regulations, it probably is, you could classify it as more mainstream, or certainly it's more of a mainstream conversation for sure. So with both of those components, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the way you approach access to these networks. If you don't have to change your operations significantly, that's a real advantage. What was it about BVNK that made the public blockchain access a little more easier? And what sort of were the factors that made you ultimately decide on BVNK?
I think it's the same selection process we have for any counterparty. For us, we need to ensure customer security. We need to be confident that we're partnering someone that knows what they're doing, has the right infrastructure to support the expectations of our clients. We're not kind of providing a product, but creating a risk scenario for them. That's really important. And I think BVNK have proven, and obviously we ourselves know the level of due diligence that MasterCard would go through in any kind of investment process, having had a minority investment from them last year. To have kind of passed that test really means that we felt confident that BVNK was the right partner for us to make this move into the public blockchain market.
I appreciate you saying that, and I happen to agree with everything you just said. I
do think
you're very
exactly as you asked. Or?
Exactly. We're focused on being that preferred enterprise solution, and I think what's so cool is that we're not trying to create a solution in search of a problem. Like I said at the beginning of the call, we're very much trying to solve the problems that our businesses are bringing to us, the clients like yourselves that come to us. And I'm curious if you can kind of paint a picture for us. Cross-border multi-currency accounts, this entire fiat movement that Corpay has gotten so good at is truly what makes your product really stand on its own. And I'm curious if you can maybe help us imagine what it might look like for businesses today. They obviously have a multi-currency product with Corpay when they sign up for an account with you. Will stablecoins simply sit alongside this as one of the other currency options that's available to them?
That's right, yeah. And I think that's the only way that we can really make this work. I think what we're trying to do is make this as straightforward as making a payment through another rail. Once that's there, then I think we'll see that adoption really increase. We're also not trying to push people down the path. I think that's the biggest thing. And from having spoken to yourselves and the team at BVNK, it's been really interesting to kind of understand where this works and where this doesn't work in terms of rolling this out more broadly. I think we are seeing this as a way in which we can now. So if you look at our established client base, I'm sure many of them will be doing, not huge sums, but many of them will be doing some stablecoin transactions. But in order for them to achieve that, they're probably having to move away from Corpay. They're doing that elsewhere, where they're then having to potentially work with a different counterparty for the on-off ramp transaction. And in general, it's kind of forcing them down paths that potentially they wouldn't want to do. So first step is we want to make sure that our clients that are needing to use stablecoins can do that with us. They don't need to move away from their primary account provider for fiat currencies. That's one. The other one is obviously naturally there are customers, well, prospects, should I rightly say, who are out there who, again, similar sort of challenge, have this problem, are working with potentially less known fintechs who have kind of made a bit of an early leap in this market. We want to basically now move into that sphere as well, helping them to kind of access us for this particular capability, but then from that point get the benefits of all the wider products that we have available to corporates, fintechs, and FIs.
I love that strategy because it's very pragmatic. You clearly recognize that with over 800,000 clients, it's impossible that some of them are not doing stablecoins today. You just know for a fact that there are some doing it. And if you can make the switching costs in such a way that they say to themselves, you know what, why would I go somewhere else when I already have a provider that I trust? Corpay, they're now giving me access to something that I could get elsewhere, but now to move my assets there and to do, open a new platform account, it's a lot of a headache. And so it kind of describe it like a land grab strategy. It's very wise to say, you know what, hey, everybody, here's some stablecoin access should you need it. We know that you're doing this elsewhere maybe, and if you need to, we can do it for you right here. And so I think that is going to be helping get through kind of my next question, which is around, this go-to-market strategy of getting this to your customers. Obviously, stablecoins have been around a while now, but they aren't completely mainstream. We've touched on this a little bit in the opening questions. Why do you think it is? And not to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing it's probably because they maybe just don't have the providers like Corpay that they trust yet. Is that sort of how you guys are thinking about it?
Yes and no. Honestly, I think there's a really interesting dynamic in stablecoin, because at its core, it's a product. It's an innovation that we're seeing. And if you look at kind of the adoption of any new product or any new technology, it kind of follows that path of the innovators who initially kind of take it. Then you have the early adopters, and then the early minority, or I forget the exact seat. But ultimately, where you kind of look at, and the debate is really open, is which point is stablecoin at? Because when it first came out, and obviously first was available, it had such a natural use case, and therefore why you saw the volumes accelerate so quickly. Because if you were operating within cryptocurrencies, the ability to kind of move out of that potentially volatile asset and into the stable coin made so much logical sense, and it solved a very real problem. You then had the kind of the next phase of it, which is, well, other businesses that have challenges with making international payments, and that can be for a variety of different reasons. Obviously, in some of the early cases, very publicized, were not necessarily the most, should you say, slightly less quality sort of business flows that were being conducted through it. And it was seen as a way of skirting traditional finance and traditional regulations and controls. Then that kind of solved that problem. You've then got this next phase, which is different corridors, different industries, different sectors that have problems making international payments because of the fundamental underlying currency, the currency controls in each country, inflation expectations in certain emerging markets. It again solves the problem. I think the challenge for stablecoin in general is making that big shift. It's like kind of widely known through any marketing person. It's crossing that chasm, and it's working out, how do you make it mainstream? How does it feel as though it's just native to the payment processing? Going back to that point at the start, you don't have CFOs, treasurers kind of wide, like 99% of the time, selecting payment rails. That's not in their mindset. They're solving another problem. So I think the challenge is that until it just is an embedded part of financial services, and it's ready to be absorbed into all of the ERPs and all of the accounting systems, and everyone understands exactly what you do once it's in your business, I think it's always going to struggle. And I think that's where we see the opportunity, is we can be the first. So as the use case starts to pivot and we find other market segments and so on, we will build that volume up. And through that adoption, businesses will have to listen. I think if you look at now, so I think you and I was mentioning a few days ago, we were talking about like businesses that are pivoting and creating kind of capabilities to absorb stablecoin. It's increasing. So I think Xero is now partnered with a couple of other counterparties that provide kind of invoicing, so they can distribute stablecoin invoice statements. They're the things that need to happen, and broadly, in order for people to actually truly lean into it, because it isn't necessarily, they don't necessarily have problems with international payments. So for them to work with it, it can't create a secondary problem by making a stablecoin payment.
I think you're 100% right. It's all about the use cases. It's all about the problem that needs to be solved, and bridging that chasm is going to require large problems in need of large solutions that can achieve a goal at scale. I think you made a really good point about the adoption curve. We've seen that play out across a variety of other technologies. You know, the internet, for example. Everyone who first used the internet was extremely difficult and complex, and the use cases back then were not a ton of enterprise commerce opportunities. They were more like creative or out of the mainstream opportunities. But then, of course, an adoption period has continued to the point where now your grandmother can use the internet. But your grandmother isn't typing https://www.facebook.com. She's opening the Facebook app. She's typing Facebook into her browser and it auto fills in. That is an analogy we can think of with regard to stablecoins. Right now, today, for most people, interacting with a stablecoin is complex. It's difficult. I have to open up a wallet. I have to do all these different things. But if an existing solution like Corpay, which is already providing a platform for their customers, can now make it seamless and easy for somebody to interact with this network, you're going to see a massive adoption increase. And I think this is also why you're starting to see the institutional validation that BVNK and enterprises like yourselves are starting to get in the market, when we can approach a problem at a large, massive business scale to say, hey, these are meaningful problems we're solving with compliant, safe, and secure solutions that will make it seamless for the users to interact with. So I think that together we really can bridge this adoption curve and really make it a reality. So I'm kind of curious, as you think of the future and as you think of the future of BVNK and Corpay together, but also stablecoins and payments in general, what are you most excited about? I know for myself, I like to envision this world where, the speed of information is instant, right? So how come the speed of money isn't instant? I've been my entire career trying to make that a reality in the different work that I do, whether it's, real-time bank cores, real-time payments and FedNow capabilities, or what I'm most passionate about, blockchain payments. So in your opinion, what are you most excited about for the future of stablecoins, blockchains, Corpay, and BVNK?
I think, honestly, I think the most fascinating thing for us is the ability to provide it. I think we are, as a business, agnostic to the rail. I think that's our biggest thing. I think our main job is to acquire corporate customers and be able to facilitate whichever form of payment rail they require. And even if they don't need to select it, we can find the most efficient way of transferring it. So I think making that and a kind of a baseline part. I think very rarely do people talk about Swift, other than if you're kind of comparing it in its speed versus stablecoin. People don't openly discuss SEPA. People don't openly discuss sort of FedNow. That's the difference. So I think the exciting thing is if stablecoin gets to a point where we don't talk about it, then it's reached that point of adoption, that it is there and it is a normal form of payment rails. I think that's the interesting thing, and I think that's where I find it quite exciting. I think if you look at the kind of the transition and the expectations, what it's creating is a faster and more efficient way of businesses of all sizes to operate. It's really a question of whether or not they're going to commit to it. When it first came out, and we were really talking about this being the kind of the decentralization, it was the break away from banks, and it was the way in which kind of finance would be removed away from the traditional structures. Actually, the banks are kind of adopting it in such a way that customers and ourselves are going to be able to experience it without even necessarily needing to select it. And I think that's the fascinating thing. And as blockchain touches many different forms of finance, I think it's going to be a really interesting ongoing period of time as more and more elements become kind of tokenized, and we can look at finance in that context.
I agree. Well, this has been a really fun discussion, Sam. Is there anything else about the partnership or anything else you want to share with our audience before we start to wrap up?
No, I think for us, it's just touching on the partnership. I think it is really exciting. We have, as we say, very clear expectations on what we're looking to do as a business. We want to consistently improve the way in which corporations make payments. And the fact is, adding BVNK as our first public stablecoin counterparty is extremely exciting. Having Connexus behind the scenes, helping us to alleviate any liquidity constraints, allowing us to provide 24/7 settlement to our customers is really our first step. We're excited to kind of add in more and more capabilities as we kind of hopefully at the forefront of this innovation.
Well, thank you, Sam, so much for taking the time to share this with our audience today. It was a real blast chatting with you about this, and I'm looking forward to more from Corpay over the coming weeks and months as we work on our partnership together. For our audience, this is Currency Live. I'm Tyler Sherwin. This has been brought to you by BVNK, Building Financial Infrastructure Powered by Stablecoins. If you'd like to learn more information about the Corpay and BVNK partnership, please head over to our blog at bvnk.com, and you can learn more about Corpay at corpay.com. We'll see you next time.